infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, last week we learned of the emergence of yet another mosquito-borne virus. It's called Madariaga virus, and the human cases were confirmed in several schoolchildren in Haiti, the first time reported in the Northern Caribbean. The cases were documented in a study in the journal PLOS Neglected Tropical Diseases. Well, joining me now to discuss Madariaga virus, the study, and what this all means is lead author J. Glenn Morris, MD. Dr. Morris is the director at the Emerging Pathogens Institute at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Dr. Morris, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so what is Madariaga virus, and where's it normally found?
Well, it gets a little bit complicated in that Madariaga virus used to be called South American Eastern Equine Encephalitis. What happened was, as people began playing around with sequences, as frequently happens when people begin playing around with sequences, they discovered that what we call Eastern Equine Encephalitis really should be best divided into two separate species, one of which is found in South America, South American Eastern Equine Encephalitis, and because that's a mouthful, it has been renamed as Madariaga virus. That's different from what could be called North American Eastern Equine Encephalitis, which we have here in the United States and here in Florida. But again, in general, what's happened is that we now use the term EEE or Eastern Equine Encephalitis for the North American strains and generally use the term Madariaga for the strains coming out of South America. And again, the strains tend to be found in South and Central America. Strains were originally, or some of the first reports came out of the Peruvian Amazon. And we really didn't think too much about it until there was a small to moderate-sized epidemic that occurred in Panama in 2010. And those were all patients with encephalitis, and it was at that point that, there was a New England Journal of Medicine article, and all of a sudden people began to recognize that, hey, this is a virus we need to know something about.
Yeah. And do you know what the prevalence is down in South America?
When people do seroprevalence studies, they generally find it's about 3 to 5% of the population that appear to have been previously exposed. And again, what seems to be going on, and this is fairly common with arboviruses, is that it looks like the majority of people who are infected with the virus have only mild disease or are asymptomatic, don't really know they've had anything unusual. But then there's a small subset of patients that get god-awful symptoms, encephalitis, and the symptoms that have been reported, and again, that were reported in the New England Journal, from Madariaga infections.
Yeah. Now, of course, its former name tells us that it infects animals. Is it just horses, or is there other species?
Well, it's known to infect horses. However, there was a very carefully done study in Panama shortly after the 2010 epidemic, where they went out and sampled all sorts of creepy, crawly, flying, everything else critter that they could find. And essentially, what they found was that it was most common in rats, particularly the short-tailed cane rat, black rats, which are, the real, the rat that goes all over the world. Some isolation from bats. They didn't find any in birds, although there have been some reports from 20 or 30 years ago suggesting that birds may be infected. But basically, it looks like it's small mammals that are the primary reservoir for this particular virus.
Okay. Now, it is a mosquito-borne virus, so Do we know what the specific mosquito vector or vectors are?
There are probably a couple, generally within the Culex species. And again, Culex is a huge species.
Mm-hmm.
Within that species, within that genus, there's several species that have been linked to shown to be vectors. There may also be some Aedes species. So again, it looks like, it can be transmitted by a variety of different mosquitoes. But again, probably primarily Culex.
Yeah.
There are a variety of Culex mosquitoes present throughout the area where the virus has been identified, as well as in Haiti, as well as in the United States.
Yeah. As you already mentioned, it's found in humans and animals. You talked about the Panama outbreak. Can you discuss the pathology that is seen with Madariaga virus?
Well, in the folks who were unfortunate enough to have the encephalitic or neurologic complications, it was pretty nasty. There was encephalitis, brain lesions, actually hyperdense lesions on MRI, seizures that evolved to status epilepticus, neurologic sequelae. But of course, there's a selection bias in this as well. The people who got brought into the hospital were the ones with the god-awful symptoms.
Sure.
And so those are the ones that were linked. Now, what's happened subsequently, for example, in some studies we were conducting in Venezuela looking for Zika, we discovered, much to our surprise, that a kid who we thought might have Zika or a similar virus, when we actually cultured her blood for viruses, we found Madariaga. And it was sort of, oh my, what's that doing there? But again, it supports the concept that probably the majority of infections occur in people, kids, who are minimally symptomatic or asymptomatic. And this actually feeds into our Haiti studies. In Haiti, since 2014, we've been monitoring a cohort of school kids in an area that's a little west of Port-au-Prince. And what we found all sorts of viruses. We were interested in particular in kind of the big three, chikungunya, dengue, Zika, and not unexpectedly found them. But we also, in looking for those, decided to take things one step farther and actually did viral cultures on all the kids who showed up with fever. And much to our surprise, in April of 2015, we had a kid who we thought might have dengue based on rather nondescript symptoms, fever, not much else. We isolated Madariaga, and it was, what is that doing there? And we sort of, thought about it, and then lo and behold, the following spring, we had a cluster of 7 kids, also with sort of a nondescript febrile illness, and we got Madariaga from all of them as well. And so we then took a look at the sequences. We sequenced the viruses. Again, we're actually isolating viruses from these kids. So we're pretty, the fact that they were infected is pretty definitive.
Sure.
And we looked at the sequences, and it was clear that all of these cases had viruses that were very closely related, were what we would call within the same clade. Now, there's some fancy stuff you can do with molecular genetics these days, where you can actually do what's calculate a molecular clock, where you can kind of see where these strains diverge, where they came from, and where they diverged from the main evolutionary line of a species. And using molecular clock techniques and available sequences coming out of Panama and other areas, it looks like that these strains probably almost certainly came to Haiti from Panama, probably sometime between October 2012 and January of 2015. I mean, with the techniques available these days, you can pinpoint it that accurately.
That's amazing.
And so what we seem to have found is the importation of this virus that up till now has been down south, Panama and parts of South America, all of a sudden appears to have been introduced into Haiti within that very narrow time window, and appears to be causing a fair number of cases of, nondescript fever in kids. Fortunately, we had no kids with encephalitis, but that also fits with the picture that encephalitis may be seen in only a small proportion of the kids or the adults who get infected.
Yeah, let me swing back to the pathology real quick, because we know that triple E in North America has got a pretty high fatality rate in humans, about 30% or more. How about, is there any human fatalities linked to Madariaga that you know of?
Yeah, it's probably about the same percentage.
Yeah.
The outbreak that was reported in New England Journal in Panama of seven confirmed cases, one died. But I mean, that's still within we're talking fairly significant mortality.
Yeah.
This is a virus that can be a very nasty virus. And if it gets into the brain, you clearly can see some very severe consequences with potentially a high mortality rate.
Sure. So, as a physician, as a public health expert, how concerning are these findings to you, and what do you see as the big picture here?
Well, I think what we're sort of getting is this picture that is of a virus that's, sort of moving out from a home base that was fairly well localized in South and Central America. We picked up this isolate in Venezuela. We've now seen this cluster of cases show up in Haiti. There's a lot of travel between Haiti and Panama and those parts of the world. Again, what it reflects is part of a broader picture that we see of movement, wide movement of these arboviruses across the Caribbean and through the Americas. As you know, there was the huge influx of dengue cases. There was the massive chikungunya outbreak that occurred. There was obviously the huge Zika outbreak that occurred. Same sort of thing, movement of a viral strain, sudden appearance and movement through the Caribbean and South America. And, is Madariaga the new Zika? I don't know. I hope not.
Right.
But I think what it does is simply reinforce this idea that these viruses move readily within these regions, both, with people and also with possibly animals, rats on ships. I don't know. Or maybe infected mosquitoes on airplanes. But I think we need to be aware of the fact that, there was all this focus on Zika, Zika. But the reality is it's part of an overall pattern of these arboviral strains moving, in cycles through this region that includes South Florida and South Texas and other parts of the United States. And I think it's something that we need to be alert to and aware of. We shouldn't say, well, it's all over, we don't need to worry about any of this anymore. I think this is just another example of strains that are movement of strains, and it's something where, as public health experts, there needs to be an awareness that when we do see encephalitis cases in the southern United States, this needs to be added to the list as, something that might be a causative agent.
Yeah. And lastly, any current follow-up research on this or anything planned, and any other final thoughts on Madariaga virus?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually following up now, and we've got a year and a half, 2 years worth of unanalyzed samples coming out of Haiti. We want to try to get a better feel for how widespread it may have been or it may currently be. In other words, was this a one-shot small cluster of cases, or does this represent true introduction of this strain and establishment of an endemic focus?
Exactly.
And so those are data we want to determine. We want to try to get a better feel for the responsible mosquitoes. And as I said, I think part of this is also just simply saying, as it is now with aseptic meningitis in kids or adults, we don't get a diagnosis in more than half the cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there needs to be an increasing awareness of the fact that there are a lot of viruses out there, and we really need to get, to really work on our diagnostics, to begin to look at the whole range of viruses that may cause these types of symptoms, and to have in place the ability to diagnose them, because that in turn gives you some feeling for long-term prognosis. Clearly, if you're infected with Madariaga and you're beginning to see neurologic symptoms, you're probably not going to have a good outcome.
Well, very interesting stuff, and I'll go ahead and link to the study when I publish the podcast on the website. And I want to thank you, Dr. Glenn Morris, for your time, your expertise, and sharing the study with us. Appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.